we're talking about death. But not just death because it's something that happens to people, but because the court also sentences people to that state. Well, a state high court in Port Harcourt has convicted and sentenced 5 individuals to death by hanging or administered lethal injection until they are confirmed dead for the murder of late OSPA commander of Omudioga community, Alex Umueruruike in Emoha local government area. The convicts Okechukwu Oji, Promise Igwe, Morrison Igwe, Goodness Monday, and Ifeanyi Igwe were found guilty of 10 counts bordering on armed robbery, illegal possession of firearms, murder, cultism, and conspiracy, among others. The trial judge, Justice S.H. Aprioko, also discharged and acquitted the 6 defendants in the matter. Alex Diwe recalled that late OSPA commander Alex was killed in 2021 by the gang members for fighting against criminal activities in Omudioga community. The prosecution counsel SP Essien Edet spoke to correspondent Emeka Otuka after the judgment.
It was a case for which the late OSPA commander was gruesomely murdered and dismembered by this gang of criminals. And we have been on trial until today. The court has finally given its judgment on the matter, and justice, I believe, has now been served in the case. First to 5 defendants as if such are not variables.
Meanwhile, the counsel to the defendant declined to speak. Now, as an observer, what would be considered is that justice has been served. The case went to court, the defense and prosecution argued, and there was a verdict. The concern, however, with death penalties is that it takes a while before the implementation. You know why? Because many governors are reluctant to sign the death warrant. So, these persons who have been sentenced might still be alive for quite some time. Well, joining me to have this conversation is Chief Festus Oguche. He's a legal expert and public affairs analyst. Good day, Chief Oguche. How are you doing?
I'm all right. Thanks for inviting me.
Yes, thank you for joining us. It has been a while.
Yes, quite some time.
It's nice to see you here.
All right.
All right. So you and I were having a short conversation yesterday, of course, about the death penalty, and you had a few thoughts, even though, of course, it had leanings with the legal angle. But before we get into, the provisions and all of that, what kind of crimes should attract a death penalty?
Well, the law books are very straightforward about it, and there are crimes that attract capital punishment. Such crimes are those that should take the life of the person that commits it,
Okay.
and it could be something that is very heinous. The books define them, and they differ from jurisdiction to the jurisdiction, though they're almost on the same ground, similar crimes, murder, armed robbery, kidnapping. Kidnapping has joined the foray of those crimes anyway, more recent times. Then treason, treasonable felony, crimes against humanity, genocide, and those things. Particularly crimes that have to do with human life, the taking of life, and because they believe that maybe if you take human life, you also go for it. It's been quite some tradition that's grown all over for a very, very long time, from the days of the ancient Hammurabi law up till the recent time, and it has gone through every degree of process and what have you. But people are saying that those crimes are not exclusive to themselves, so they can be redefined depending on the jurisdiction. In some jurisdictions, like in the Middle East and Islamic countries, adultery will fetch you the punishment of death, the death penalty. In some other places, like in Latin American countries, certain acts that disturb the public peace could fetch you that. as low as such crime, but they get categorized within the sphere of those crimes that should attract the death penalty.
Well, if I'm having conversations with friends, by the side of the street, with everything you've listed, I think the only crime that I would think warrants the death penalty would be murder. We would just make a case for a life for a life. So if a life has been taken, well, their own life should be taken. But for others on that list, especially treason, what qualifies as treason? What does a person need to do or refuse to do for them to, qualify for treasonable felony? And why is that punishable by death in Nigeria?
Well, it's something that challenges the state structure by itself, and maybe an action that tends to create an uprising amongst the population, such that could upturn the tranquility of the society. And apart from that, there are some other crimes that you think otherwise maybe shouldn't attract the death penalty. Homosexuality in some places, lesbianism, particularly in some of these deeply religious jurisdictions. And maybe during the apartheid regime, before the liberation of Southern Africa, getting married to a black woman or having an affair with a black woman could fetch you that. In the antebellum American system, you could get murdered or hung for looking passionately at a woman. At a white woman. Wow. A lot of these hangings that were done in those days were just very passive crimes that did not warrant that type of punishment because nobody died in the process. What about the Catholic Inquisitions? During prior to the advent of liberal society, when in Europe that time, when the Roman Catholic was in charge of everywhere, one little act of heresy fetches you the crime, the punishment of death. A lot of philosophers and scholars have been hung
for thinking differently.
Yeah. In the days of this Zulu chief, what's his name? The king of Zululand,
Shaka
the Zulu.
Yeah.
What fetches you that punishment? Just one little thing. Maybe you laugh at him when he's eating, or maybe make some little noise that wakes him up from his sleep.
Are you kidding me now?
And there you go.
And
we had a queen in South Africa then, and who would have a harem of boys, if you permit me to use the word harem. And what happens is that she will sleep with one, and before morning, that one is gone.
Oh my goodness!
And the next day, something. During those times, barbaric things were really happening.
Yeah, but
terrible things.
They could be explained away by the system of government. Some were monarchies; they were not democracies. So, by degree, if you are under the rule of a king, you would expect that his word is law. It might not be just, but we understand the system of government. But for a democracy, it's difficult to explain some of these things away. Especially when you spoke about, defining treason, you said if it leads to an uprising. Now, this uprising, as you said, which threatens the tranquility
of society.
This uprising might be a revolution, which means that there is a dissatisfaction with, the
whole essence of treason is to discourage dissidents. Even though the government may not be doing the right things, but if you want to push it out to the people that, look, you have a right to raise arms or to do certain things. We know what is happening within the economy. If you go around the entire Nigerian population, demography, you understand maybe they have this disdain about what is going on now. But do something about telling the people to take up arms, and you're there. Treason would apply, of course, with the full force of the law, and the end result is that it will fetch you a capital punishment. But you see, the whole thing about the death penalty is beginning to be the core issue for modern agitation, contemporary agitation, particularly by human rights activists across the world. And it's getting to be minimized, particularly in the United States, in Britain, other parts of Europe, and South Latin America, though it is still very much enforced in those countries in Latin America. But for Africa itself, there scholars have said that there's nothing that will attract capital punishment for anybody.
Nothing.
You could get banishment, you can get banished, you can get ostracized. Though there are human sacrifices. But if you look at it deeply, it will be difficult for kinsmen to gather together and condemn somebody to death, except in war situations, where maybe the person who is standing trial before them is an enemy or something like that, and maybe they want to use him to pay or appease the spirit of their kinsmen who have gone to the great beyond.
It is difficult to imagine that any price would be enough for taking a life besides the life of the killer. You know, I mean, I'm not trying to... These are very sensitive conversations, but
yes,
in the event that a person kills and it is premeditated, it's not in self-defense, it's not any of the other ways that the law describes it. This is premeditated murder. It's hard to think of any other punishment besides taking the life of such a person.
The new thinking does not even say you should take the life of such a person. The new advocacy that's gaining ground across the world.
Okay.
And it has even found space in one of the conventions. That's the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 6, that provides that countries should abolish the death penalty.
So what is a viable substitute?
The thinking we are having now is because society is getting advanced. Modernism is taking over from barbarism. And for that reason, think about slavery, for instance. How would anybody say, I own this other person?
Yeah.
You know, so it's the thing that happened in that era. But one that is refusing to go away is the death penalty. And it is surprising that it's still being applied because there are other forms of punishment. What activists are saying, rather, is that people who commit heinous crimes that attract the death penalty be made to serve life sentences.
Yeah,
and I think it's very logical to look at it from that perspective.
Yeah, it is. It is. You know, I mean, we can have intellectual conversations around what should be.
Yes, I agree with you.
Yes, what should be. But, Barrister Oguche, it's difficult to think of any other punishment because I'm thinking, what is the perfect substitute for the death penalty for a person who has committed murder?
If we were in the 15th century, for instance, you'll think that it's just getting the person's head cut off. Well, there are so many modes of doing that.
We have to take a break now.
Okay.
I'm sure when we return, we'll have this conversation. Please stay with us.
Shall we from our heart give thanks to God for all that He's done?
But the hour cometh, and now is
Oracle Chinedu, we have for a major part of the hour been talking about the death penalty, and this is thanks to a state high court in Port Harcourt convicting and sentencing 5 individuals to death by hanging or administered lethal injection until they are confirmed dead for the murder of a late OSPAC commander. My guest is Barrister Festus Oguche. He's a legal expert and public affairs analyst. You're welcome once again, sir.
Thank you very much.
So before the break, we were talking about, you were saying modernism, the abolition of the death penalty. Lots of countries are beginning to look in that direction. And my question was, so what's a perfect substitute for murder, if not death?
Well, murder is a very heinous crime. It takes a lot of wickedness for one to perpetrate that kind of evil against a fellow human being. The circumstances could be diverse. There could be defenses, that are justifiable. Others are unjustifiable. Others could just be the state of mind of the killer, his psychological state of mind. So for somebody who has strips of psychiatry, the law gives excuses. Others could just be the social environment, that compelling circumstances that makes it impossible to have acted properly, like anger, like drunkenness. The human mind is very wavy. It's like an unruly horse. It can go anywhere. When it gets very angry, somebody gets up and returns home to meet somebody on top of his wife, and raises his machetes and cuts off his wife's head. You begin to ask questions whether it was possible for him to have controlled himself at that particular scene. Not a lot of minds are so developed to that level. But to then ask yourself the question as to why they killed Jesus Christ. Was it deserving? And now, if you go into the fundamentals of the reasoning behind murder,
I would say it was fulfillment of prophecy. That's one way to look at it.
So prophecy is somewhere else. We are talking about the justification of hanging on the cross a fellow human being.
Okay.
Who before that incident had been was it the king of Rome or whoever he was brought before, had told them this man had not done anything. He only had what he had. What was it he had? He had a sense of his own ideology about approach to God, about religion, about divinity. But he was hung on the cross. There were others like that. And it's not just if there are alternatives. There could be alternatives. But then the most important thing to even look at was the mode. Up till now, if they tell you certain modes that they used to execute these punishments, you shudder. Crucifixion, that's Jesus Christ, for instance. Drowning, beaten to death, stoning, burning alive, impalements, burning at stake, hanging, beheading, for marrying a Jew, for instance, in the Nazi Germany. You're killed. So it's simply that the contemporary times begins to take the control of our inner self and inner thoughts about such barbaric acts and things that should not be. And I think it had gotten to a stage where countries now begin to consider these things, because this law that I just quoted, the Convention, Civil and Political Rights of 1966, a UN instrument, has been very emphatic about it, that the death penalty should be abolished. The option you talked about is one that I said earlier, which activists have been bandying all over the place. That, look, let the person serve a life sentence. He remains in jail forever. And I think it's quite some appropriate option, if you ask me.
Chief Oguche, the idea behind a correctional facility is to reform. Right? Mm-hmm. By definition, the title is correctional facility. How do you sentence a person to be corrected, and that is supposed to be punishment for murder? Take you to prison, life imprisonment, you stay there forever. But the idea behind the prison is to reform people. So that's not punishment.
It would be punishment. But then keeping somebody behind bars for quite some time can be very discomforting. It can also be sanitizing. It can also inflict some bit of sanity in your some bit of common sense in your head.
But it doesn't compare
self-control
to the killing.
But then
of
there
a
are
person.
people that cannot be corrected. There are those you take there and they will never be corrected. They get hardened as soon as they get out.
Yeah,
and that is very typical of Nigerian prisons. Even though they call it correctional centers, we are beginning to question how that name can fly when there's not been any iota of correction. The only correction they get there is hunger, starvation, and brutality.
Well, in the defense of the
But as far as I'm concerned, Chinedu, let me tell you my innermost thoughts. There's no justification for the death penalty. Human life is sacrosanct. It must be respected. All the holy books pronounce it. They talk about it. And thank God for the new age advocacy for its abolition. But then it's not just the abolition alone. Like I think that is even one of the key areas why you invited me to this program. The idea that somebody could be condemned to death and he's still alive for years.
Yeah.
A case like that started at I think it was at the High Court in Ibadan, where somebody said he has a right to death. I have been condemned by court, and I'm still alive for years. The matter went all the way to the Supreme Court. The emotional trauma the individual will go through while waiting for the day he'll be hung is more deeper than even the death sentence.
It's like how they say the anticipation of death is worse than death itself.
Yes.
So let's look at the major point behind this conversation: the reluctance of governors to sign the death warrant. The person has been sentenced to death; they are waiting, but many governors don't want to sign. A lot of governors just don't want to sign. So that means the person stays alive. What does this make of the system of condemning people to death, but somehow they don't get to die because the man who should endorse does not endorse? Isn't it counterproductive? And
answering your question, I'll take us back to the former governor of Osun State, Ralph Adbishola. I hope I got that right. And he was governor throughout his governorship, his tenure. He never signed any death warrants for anybody. But when he became a minister, he started calling the governors' names. No governor was ready. We want to decongest the prisons. You don't kill people for the congestion. A whole lot of issues are involved. And he may have a point, though, but I think it has to do with his approach. But then you will not blame the governors, because we have a society that is evolving through the moral age, and things are changing. It's no longer the typicality of what it used to be, particularly in African societies where, like I told you, the death penalty is alien, and it's an European adaptation to cow and intimidate the Africans. It started with Leopold III in Belgium, in the Congo area. Where people started to be hung and killed and murdered. I told you that the typical African setting will prescribe a banishing, ostracization. They can even condemn you to the evil forest. You go there. Whether the lions or the tigers end up devouring you, that's a different story altogether. That's the typical African setting, except for the one I told you about, the Zulu king, who was hanging his enemies, supposedly, for little or nothing, hanging them on the stakes. But at the end of the day, the reluctance of the governors to sign this has a deep moral significance, in the sense that even though it is there in the law books, it is not the appropriate method to check crime. This thing started in Nigeria in the 70s. I'm sure by then you're still a toddler. Maybe you're somewhere else. When they used to have the Babbage show, soldiers will group before the suspects or the condemned persons and target their guns at them and shoot.
Firing squad.
Yeah,
it used to be in full view of.
Yes, it was a show. It was like a show. And at the end of the day, people thought that probably it would, to some extent, curb some of these criminal tendencies. But then, unfortunately, quite seriously, it's turned the other way. Because prior to that shooting, which we call the Babbage show in Lagos, and people who relish in that type of scenery will travel to Lagos to observe it. The rate of crime was not as high as we have now.
It became tourist attraction.
Yes. So at the end, it is having a counterproductive relevance to our society, that the more you kill people for committing crimes, the more the crime gets entrenched in society. The basic things that relate to crime are not being handled. I grew up in the 70s, like I told you. There was very little or no crime then. Little or no crime because of the orientation. Cultural and social orientation then was very deepening, and they have a very big impact in your life that you find it difficult to go the other way.
All right. Well, let's have conversations with the listener. The question for you is, should the death penalty be abolished? It's a very simple question. Hopefully you give a simple answer. 003. WhatsApp is 080-903-06-416. We're live on Facebook and Twitter at Nigeria InfoPH, so you can watch as you listen and make your voice heard. Let's see, I'll be going to the phone line shortly. I have a comment here. This is from Ezekwere Henry. Says, I think we should commend the State High Court for doing a good job in sentencing those 5 persons to death, because they fail to understand that we all are human. They should go and rest in peace. Bakata from Ozohia community. Well, if you've listened to the show, you know that depending on the body language of the governor, they might not rest anytime soon. Good evening, Sam. I'm still waiting for the guest to answer the question you asked. In case he has forgotten, what punishment should replace death penalty? General Manowski. Well, he said actually that life imprisonment is a substitute for that. JJ calls from PH Town. Hello, JJ. Good evening.
Yeah, good evening to you, Sam.
Good evening.
And good evening to your guest.
Good old JJ, how are you?
Yeah, thank you, sir. I am not a Christian, but I also know that the Bible said the soul that sinneth shall die. That's one. 2, according to somebody I like so much, Putin, the president of Russia right now, he said, and I quote, that it is function or it is duty to take people to God. And it is the duty of God now to either forgive them or send them to wherever. I think that is how society grows. You talked about the 70s. I also grew up in the 70s. And I know that for every offense you commit at that time, you are punished. And that is why you have society shaped at that time that you are facing right now. Now there is no consequence. I don't think that no consequence will allow society to grow and continue to grow at the end of the day. I watched a video some time ago where some white boys from Europe were telling us that in Saudi Arabia, because of the type of way they go about their own culture and all put together, not all these ones that we glorify criminality, give them chieftaincy title and all those, that if you drop your $10 million in the street of Saudi Arabia, walk from Rumukogo to Maitri, come back, you will meet it there, nobody will touch it. So we must punish people, whether death penalty, everything, to serve as a deterrent to others. I don't want to know how many people that we need to punish before society learns, or less at it. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, JJ. Now, for the Bible verse you quoted, some would argue that the death in that context is a spiritual death. Daniel from Imo Gate. Good evening.
Good evening, Samarako.
Good evening.
Yes, I so much thank my own is, I think I have the same stand with Obama. Like you rightly put it there, against right people. That and it's the setting that when one is condemned, it's even more than itself. Why are someone with the government that in view of what we know today, that some people may be condemned while they did not commit a crime? I am not a lawyer or whatever, but what I hear when some judges pass pass their judgment is based on the information. Really, he will give his verdict. Which means, you know that the judge has received a step from condemning that person. If it based on the information, I will pass this judgment. Which
All right, Daniel, thank you very much. We had some problems hearing you well. Please call back if you can. I'm still taking your thoughts. Ariselia says the name of the minister is Rauf Aregbeshola. Yes, he did say that. Thank you very much, Ariselia. And Jonathan says, if you kill a man, I didn't get that. If you kill a man, you have not punished him. One must be alive to be punished. You only got closure. Okay, that is quite the perspective. What's your take on that, sir?
Well, I think that one is a deep philosophical. It has a deep philosophical meaning.
Okay.
That I may not be able to explain immediately.
All right. Death penalty should be abolished. Whoever kills should be killed. Beauty from Igruta says. And this one says, good afternoon, Nigeria Info. Good evening to you. I think most times such punishment should help to instill fear in the minds of other people who intend to commit any crime. Now, I was awaiting trial at the correctional facility in town. I heard other people talked about their next move when they come out from the one they are serving. So I support.
Because they get hardened from that place.
Yeah, like you said, it doesn't correct.
It's not corrective in any way.
It doesn't correct.
There are corrective centers that you take even the most hardest of criminals to, and they come out a different being. As far as I'm concerned, the death penalty has not helped in any way to reshape the minds of people who commit crimes like murder. It has not curbed the growing levels of criminality that we had at that time. And the recourse to lynching also is something that we put into perspective in considering the rightness or wrongness of the death penalty, because lynching is all over the place. Somebody's caught, somebody's shouting thief, 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 and the whole people just congregate around him and put a tie on his neck, and there he goes.
Yeah, it's quite sad.
It's a great problem.
Now, I want to go back to the report, the statement. State High Court in Port Harcourt has convicted and sentenced 5 individuals to death by hanging or administered lethal injection. Why is the court undecided as to the administration of this hanging or lethal injection? Is that?
It's not undecided. It has done what it's supposed to do. It has passed its sentence. I think that is Justice Sika Aprioko.
Yes.
Judge of the High Court of Rivers State. A very effective judge, I must confess. But he has an option to give them lethal administration of injection. Is a very quiet way of getting one to go to the great beyond without much pain. It was that philosophy they had when they introduced cyanide. That was in the state of Missouri, Nevada, in the United States in 1945, away from the wheelchair. Is it the wheelchair? There's silver chair or golden chair or whatever chair that they used to electrocute persons and send them to the great beyond, which is considered to be very painful.
Yeah.
So both of these methods are still very okay, by hanging on the neck until you die, by what's the second one?
Lethal injection or hanging.
Injection or hanging. It's not a tea party for a judge to reach a conclusion like that, a decision like that. This is not an election petition where they do anyhow. Because they know what it involves.
Yeah.
A lot of evidence must have been evaluated and sieved through. Everything must have pointed directly and unequivocally to the fact that the convicted person, the condemned person, had committed that crime. And this can be provable by evidence, factual evidence, as to the case of the prosecution, whether the prosecution prove its case and remember the standards beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah.
It is not an easy thing for a judge. If you've attended the proceedings where such sentences are passed, the judge will usually go in, adorn himself in a totally different attire, And what that means is that within him, he's very much assured that he's dispensing justice in the proper manner that the law states. Though it's gotten to a stage where you now begin to ask a lot of questions, though, on the level of culpability of people that are condemned. But you cannot rightly say or correctly say that all of them that are condemned are guilty.
Yeah.
True to say.
So the risk of execution of innocent people still exists. Yeah.
It is there. It's very, very much there. As you find in the United States, somebody spends up to 50, 40 years in prison. At the end, they tell him that he didn't commit that crime.
Oh my.
And the state settles him with about $2-3 million. $2-3 million cannot account for my life for even a couple of days. So it's still possible that innocent persons are sent to the gallows for doing nothing. Ken Saro-Wiwa, for instance, what crime did he commit?
Yeah, but you have to remember that was the military. And so, again, the form of government matters.
The judicature under the military operates in the same way as it is under the democratic system.
Yeah, but
as a matter of fact, we had a better judicial system in the military. That was the glowing era of Nigeria's judicature than in a democratic dispensation.
Yeah,
people will tell you that.
Barrister Oguche, when you look at a government that works on decree, right, it's very close to a monarchy. In a democracy or civilian rule, you would look at the different tiers of government, arms rather, or it has to go through the legislature. They have to, make it an act, and the president has to assent. A lot of things go through a lot of processes, but in the military, your emotions is enough to make something happen. So while I'm not making excuses for the execution of Ken Saro-Wiwa, there is still the argument of the kind of government that was in play at the time.
I agree with you. Like the judge that apologized to Fela after he convicted him. A lot of wonderful things, wild things happen around here. But then the bottom line again, and which we must also consider, is the fact that in administering the death penalty, are there any rules that suggest the guilt or the innocence of the accused person? Are there any standard rules that you can say that is applicable in that realm, that is of universal standard for gauging the level of guilt or the level of innocence?
No, there aren't. You can't measure that.
So it's at the discretion of the judicial officer.
Oh my goodness.
And that is why we are saying that judicial officers' appointments must be done with discreet intent.
Yes, indeed.
Not for political purposes.
Because they hold life, literally.
Yes, but the power of life and death is in the hands of the judge.
All right, we have another break. I've been waiting to take calls. I'm not sure what's happening with the phone lines, but I have a few messages which I'll take after the break. Please stay with us. 92.3 Nigeria Info. I have Barrister Festus Oguche right here, and we're talking about the death penalty. Finally and quickly, sir. Why is the consent of a governor required for death penalties? Considering the reluctance to sign here in Nigeria, this is an important question. And isn't there a way to override it?
I think it is, because the governors are thereby expressing their own sentiments about the death penalty.
Okay.
And I think it's one ideal that is running through the minds of virtually everybody, with the fear that probably if there's an error in that judgment and I sign this warrant, the blood of the convicted person will be on my head.
Okay. So what's the sustainable solution to this?
Sustainable solutions are that Nigeria should join other countries that have abolished the death penalty. Many countries, some in Africa even. I think it was Senegal, I can't remember, but some other countries, and evolve a better method of giving a proper orientation to the younger generation, where we have a highly militarized society like this. You are talking about the soldiers that were killed. What should happen to those that beheaded them?
This might encourage jungle justice, because for the bereaved, family members of those who have been murdered, they would not consider whatever comes out of the justice system justice if the killer of their family member is not killed. So it might lead to some,
reprisals.
Yeah.
I think it's possible, but a better way of going about it is the cost-effect dimension of checking those issues that lead people to commit such heinous crimes, like unemployment that gets people to go and kidnap or commit armed robbery or kill or do anything.
Right.
The inordinate quest for money and all that gets people to go and get into rituals and kill their fellow human beings, thinking that it will get money to them, to bring money to them. That's even the new thinking.
Well,
in the old Nigeria that we grew up in, there are things like that were not existent. So I think human life must at all times be preserved. That's my submission. It's sacrosanct. No human being can take another's life, not even through the due process of the law.
It was difficult to argue with that position. Thank you very much, Barrister Oguche, for making the time. It's always a pleasure sharing space with you.
Thanks.
It's 6 p.m. Time for the major news. After that, it's open season. Stay with us.